You know, there are moments in history when the ocean feels more like a silent witness than a body of water. Moments when thousands of tons of steel, sweat, and human hope glide across the waves, unaware that somewhere beneath them, hidden in the cold darkness, a single thread of fate is waiting to be pulled. And when that thread snaps, lives change, nations shake, and the world feels a little smaller. Picture a giant warship so large, so mighty, that it seemed almost impossible to bring down. Picture it slicing through the waves with the confidence of an empire at its height. Now imagine all of that brought to its knees by a submarine lurking below, small enough to hide in the shadows, yet dangerous enough to rewrite naval history in a single afternoon. The ocean remembers that day. Sailors who survived never forgot it, and even now, decades later, the story still sends a shiver down the spine of anyone who truly understands how fragile even the greatest war machines can be. Before we dive into this story together, if you enjoy these deep, emotional journeys into forgotten corners of history, go ahead and subscribe. It helps more than you think, and if you find yourself hooked already, give the video a like and share it with someone who loves old war stories as much as you do. All right, let's begin. The story of the largest warship ever sunk by a submarine doesn't start with explosions or alarms or the desperate cries of men scrambling for their lives. It begins years earlier, in the grand halls of imperial ambition. Japan, rising fast as a naval powerhouse, believed that battleships were still the kings of the sea. Even when aircraft carriers were starting to prove their worth, many in the Imperial Navy still clung to the idea that giant warships, armed with massive guns, were the true symbols of power. And so they built one of the giants of their fleet, the aircraft carrier Shinano, a name whispered with pride in some circles, fear in others. The Shinano was unlike almost anything afloat at the time. She wasn't just big, she was colossal, more than 800 feet long, over 70,000 tons when fully loaded. Built on the frame of what was supposed to be the third Yamato-class battleship, she carried the spirit of the mighty Yamato and Musashi inside her steel bones. Imagine taking the skeleton of one of the largest battleships ever made and turning it into an aircraft carrier. That was Shinano. A strange hybrid of old doctrine and new necessity. She wasn't built for speed. She wasn't even fully finished. Japan rushed her into service, patching her together as fast as they could, trying desperately to keep pace with the war that was slipping out of their hands. Her mission was simple on paper: serve as a support carrier. Carry spare planes, spare parts, fuel, ammunition, and help replenish the frontline carriers trying to hold the line in the Pacific. But the truth is, she was more of a symbol than anything else. A symbol that Japan could still build something enormous, something impressive, something that proved they weren't finished yet. But symbols have a funny way of attracting fate. On the other side of the ocean was an American submarine crew, tired, cramped, hungry for action, and trained to strike whenever the opportunity appeared. The USS Archer-Fish wasn't the most famous submarine in the fleet, nor the fastest, nor the most dangerous on paper. But what it had was a captain who knew how to read the sea, who trusted his instincts, and who understood that sometimes patience is the deadliest weapon of all. It was November 1944 when the paths of these two vessels crossed. Shinano, barely completed, crew still learning her layout, watertight compartments unfinished or improperly sealed, slipped out of Yokosuka under the cover of night. Her escort was small, too small for a ship of her size. The secrecy around her construction was so intense that even many in Japan didn't know she existed. They hoped this secrecy would protect her. But the sea doesn't care about secrecy. And submarines care even less. Archer-Fish had been patrolling the area for days. Her crew exhausted, morale stretched thin, and their patrol almost over. They didn't know a massive prize was about to wander straight into their reach. When they first spotted the shape of Shinano on the horizon, they didn't even know what they were looking at. All they saw was something big, too big, something that shouldn't have been there, a ghost on the water. Captain Joseph Enright ordered the submarine to shadow the mysterious ship. He didn't want to rush the attack. A rushed shot could mean wasted torpedoes and months of regret. Instead, he stayed parallel to the giant, careful, patient, like a predator studying a strange new prey. The ocean was calm that night, almost too calm, the kind of calm that makes sailors uneasy. Shinano moved slowly, escorted by a few destroyers that kept weaving back and forth, scanning for submarines, listening for the faintest echo underwater, but they didn't hear Archer-Fish. They didn't see her. They didn't suspect that the quiet ripple far beneath them was death waiting with a stopwatch in its hand. For hours, the two vessels danced this strange, silent dance, the submarine trailing, adjusting, waiting. The carrier unaware that every mile it traveled brought it closer to disaster. Inside Shinano, the crew was hopeful but tense. They knew the ship wasn't ready. They knew water pumps weren't fully installed. They knew watertight doors didn't seal properly. Many compartments were still open for construction, giving water a free highway if the hull was breached. But orders were orders, and the Empire needed every ship it could muster. By nightfall, the escort destroyers were growing careless. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they trusted too much in Shinano's size. Or maybe they simply believed no American submarine would dare come this close to Japan's home waters. Whatever the reason, their pattern loosened, small gaps opening in their protective screen. When Captain Enright saw his chance, he maneuvered Archer-Fish into firing position, watching the giant glide across the dark surface like a mountain drifting in a dream. It takes a strange kind of courage to attack something so colossal when all you have are 6 torpedoes and nerves of steel. But that's what submarine crews lived for. The moment when everything came down to 6 metal cylinders holding explosive warheads and the hope that they'd run true. At 3:17 in the morning, Archer-Fish fired. 6 torpedoes raced toward the Shinano, slicing through the black water, invisible, silent, relentless. The moment after firing is always the hardest for a submarine crew. You can't see the torpedoes. You can't guide them. All you can do is wait and hope. The first explosion was soft, muffled by distance and water. Then came another, and another. 4 out of the 6 torpedoes slammed into the Shinano's massive hull. The giant shuddered. Lights flickered. Men stumbled as if the ship itself had been punched in the gut. At first, the damage didn't seem catastrophic. The ship wasn't sinking. She wasn't breaking apart. But water had found those open compartments. It rushed inside like a thief slipping through an unlocked door. Pumps struggled. Bulkheads groaned. And deep inside the carrier's belly, the ocean started its slow, steady, merciless work. Shinano's crew fought hard. They weren't inexperienced, just unlucky. They raced to seal doors that couldn't seal. They tried to start pumps that weren't installed properly. They tried to redistribute ballast to keep the ship balanced, but water kept rising. Every minute, the list grew worse. 10 degrees, 15, 18. And as the sun began to rise over the Pacific, the truth became impossible to deny. The largest aircraft carrier in the world, the heaviest warship ever sunk by a submarine, was dying. Before we go deeper into that final fight to save the Shinano, let me take one quick breath with you. If you're still with me, enjoying this journey, tap that like button. It tells the YouTube gremlins that this story is worth sharing. And if you want more tales like this, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one. Alright, let's head back into the water. So there she was, this giant of steel, trying to stay alive while the sea pushed harder and harder against her wounded belly. The officers on the bridge kept shouting orders, but anyone who has ever been on a ship taking on water knows that at some point, the real battle isn't fought on the deck. It's fought deep below, where the air grows thick, the lights flicker, and men scramble through twisting corridors that feel more like veins inside a beast than anything human-made. Down there, sailors were wading through rising water, dragging hoses, trying to rig makeshift pumps, doing their best to slow the flooding. They were scared, sure, but they kept going. Young men, barely old enough to shave, holding onto the hope that they could save this massive ship that had barely finished being born. One of the cruelest things about the Shinano's situation was that she was built to withstand heavy damage, at least on paper. Her armor was thick, her hull reinforced, her size alone should have given her a fighting chance. But all that strength doesn't matter when someone rushes you into battle before you're ready. A ship is a little like a person. If it's half-healed, it shouldn't be thrown into a storm. And Shinano was full of open wounds. Missing pumps, unfinished compartments, weak seals, things that would have been fixed with time. But time was something Japan didn't have. Every day the war pressed harder. Every day the skies burned with American bombers. Every day the Imperial Navy slipped a little further behind. So they pushed Shinano out to sea, hoping her size alone would protect her. It didn't. The more she listed, the harder it became for her crew to move. Until the TED deck is like walking on ice in a world that's slowly turning sideways. Tools slide away, doors jam, anything not tied down becomes a weapon, and all the while the sea kept pushing inside. It's strange how fast water can claim a ship. From the outside, everything looks almost normal for a long time, but inside it's chaos, and the Shinano was no exception. The destroyers racing alongside her were doing everything they could too. They sent over pumps and equipment. They circled the carrier, scanning desperately for the submarine they believed might strike again. But the Archer-Fish was long gone, already slipping under the waves, diving quietly into the deep after loosing her torpedoes. Captain Enright and his crew didn't even know what they had hit. All they knew was something big, something important. They didn't learn until much later that they had sunk the largest vessel in naval history ever taken down by a submarine. Just imagine that moment for them, realizing the full weight of what had happened long after the ocean had swallowed the proof. Back on the Shinano, as the hours ticked by, the ship tried to fight back. Her engines roared harder. She tried to push toward land, toward shallow water, toward anything that might save her. But speed didn't help. It only dragged more water into her wounds. Men reported that pumps were failing one after another, choking on the rising tides. Some of the watertight doors that should have closed with a heavy thud instead rattled like loose shutters in the wind. Then the ship's internal structure, meant to divide and isolate flooding, acted more like a funnel, quietly guiding seawater deeper inside. There's a kind of moment every ship reaches when the crew, even if they don't say it out loud, understands that the battle is lost. It's not dramatic. There's no single sound or sudden explosion. It's more like a slow settling in the stomach, a tiny shift in the deck's angle that tells you the ship isn't coming back up. On the Shinano, that moment came around mid-morning. Officers ran the numbers, checked the pumps, timed the rise of the water, calculated the angles. The answer was always the same. The carrier was slipping away. Still, they didn't give up. The Japanese Navy in those days fought with a grim kind of determination, a belief that dying with your ship was better than abandoning it. But even the bravest sailor knows when staying aboard means certain death. The order to abandon ship came late, too late for many. Some didn't even hear it because they were trapped below, cut off by flooding compartments that had turned into steel coffins. Above deck, men scrambled for lifeboats or jumped into the sea, clutching whatever floated. They looked back at the Shinano, watching the giant tilt further, her bow rising as if trying to take one last breath before the end. The water around her churned with debris and fuel. The air smelled of oil, sweat, and fear. And suddenly, with a slow, heartbreaking finality, she rolled. Imagine seeing something that enormous, bigger than any building in the town you grew up in turn on its side, as gently as a child rolling over in bed. Then she slid beneath the surface, leaving only waves and scattered wreckage behind. It took just 7 hours from the torpedo strike to the final plunge. 7 hours for a ship that had taken years to build. 7 hours to erase a piece of engineering that was supposed to stand as a symbol of power. Of the more than 2,400 men aboard, around 1,400 survived. Many were picked up by the escorting destroyers, though even they had to search quickly and leave quickly, afraid the submarine might still be lurking. Those who lived carried the memory of that morning for the rest of their lives. They spoke of the sudden cold of the ocean, the strange quiet after the ship disappeared, and the disbelief that something so massive could vanish so fast. And as for the Archer-Fish crew, when they learned what they had accomplished, their jaws must have hit the floor. Submariners usually aim for supply ships, transports, maybe a cruiser if luck shines on them. But sinking the largest aircraft carrier ever built at that time, well, that's the kind of thing you expect to hear in a tavern tale, not from your own patrol report. The Navy didn't even believe Captain Enright at first. They thought he exaggerated the target's size. Maybe the darkness played tricks on him. Maybe he miscounted the explosions. It wasn't until after the war, when Japanese records came to light, that everyone realized he had been dead on. His instincts were right. His patience had paid off, and his crew had written their names into the strange, unpredictable ledger of naval history. What always strikes me about this story isn't just the sinking itself, but the layers of irony wrapped around it. A ship born out of desperation, designed from the skeleton of a battleship because Japan couldn't afford to start fresh. A ship rushed to sea because every day was an emergency. A ship meant to support others, yet barely able to support her own weight. And in the end, she fell not to bombers or carrier groups or massive fleets, but to a single submarine with nothing but 6 torpedoes and a captain who trusted his gut. War has a way of humbling giants. The sea does too. And if you're still with me, still sailing through this story, let me take a second to thank you. These long journeys we take together, I never take them for granted. If you haven't already, feel free to subscribe. It helps this little corner of history keep going. And dropping a like on the video tells the algorithm folks that people still care about stories like this. All right, back to it, because we've still got a bit more to uncover before we reach the horizon. One detail people often forget is just how secret the Shinano project really was. Japan didn't want the world to know about her, not until she was finished and ready to fight. Even many of her own sailors didn't know the ship's true displacement until she was already at sea. When she left Yokosuka, she didn't even carry her full complement of aircraft. Imagine that. A carrier, the largest in the world at that time, sailing without planes. She was like a giant with empty fists, built for a punch she never got to throw. Her captain, Toshio Abe, was a capable officer, respected by his men, but he'd only had a short time to familiarize himself with this enormous vessel. The layout was confusing. The crew was new. Training time was scarce. They had spent more time hauling construction materials around the ship than practicing emergency drills. Some sailors later recalled that the watertight hatches didn't close cleanly, that they had to force them or wedge tools underneath. Those little moments, the ones that seem harmless during construction, became fatal when the torpedoes struck. And speaking of the torpedo strikes, the point of impact couldn't have been worse. The 4 hits landed near the starboard side, in areas vital to stability. When the compartments flooded, the water rushed along the path of least resistance, slipping into hangars, ammunition storage rooms, fuel tanks, and even machinery spaces that should have been sealed. Engineers reported hearing bulkheads buckling under pressure. Metal doesn't scream, but if you've ever been near a hull under stress, you know it groans, it pops, it shakes in a way that sends a chill down your spine. Some crewmen said they heard sounds like distant thunder below their feet as the ship struggled to hold herself together. But the Shinano wasn't the only character in this story. The ocean had a role too. The sea that morning was calm, almost glassy. That kind of calm makes it easier for water to slip into a damaged hull. Waves weren't crashing around to counterbalance the flooding. The stillness almost helped the water settle into the ship, feeding the list little by little. And yet, even in those last hours, there were moments of humanity, small flashes of courage and kindness that remind you war isn't just steel and explosions. Some sailors formed human chains to pass tools and equipment. Others helped injured men to the upper decks. One young crewman, barely 19, later remembered how an older petty officer shoved him up a ladder and said, "You're too young to die on your first voyage." The older man didn't make it out. The younger one carried those words for the rest of his life. The funny thing is, stories like these often get overshadowed by the big statistics, the tonnage, the coordinates, the battle reports. But behind each number is a heartbeat, a human trying to survive something bigger than himself. Now, before we head into the final stretch of this tale, take a breath with me. If you're enjoying the journey, you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, and maybe share this video with someone who loves history as much as you do. It keeps this channel alive, and it helps these forgotten stories find new listeners. All right, my friend, let's bring this story home. When the Shinano disappeared beneath the surface, the sea didn't roar or thrash or spit her back out. It simply swallowed her. A quiet gulp, a sigh of bubbles, a few planks creaking as they floated back up, along with bits of wood, pieces of rope, and the stunned silence of men bobbing in the cold water. Survivors said the sudden emptiness was almost worse than the chaos before it. One moment they were clinging to a world of steel, noise, and desperate effort, and the next they were alone with nothing but the morning sun creeping over the horizon. Some stared at the patch of water where the ship had been, half expecting her to rise again. Others didn't look at all, too shaken to face the truth. The destroyers moved fast, throwing down rope ladders, hauling men aboard as quickly as they could. Time was not their friend. They feared another torpedo might be coming, and they had no way to know the submarine. Yi was already miles away, slipping deeper into the dark like a shadow retreating before dawn. Sailors stumbled onto the decks of the escorts, soaked, freezing, covered in oil that clung to their skin like tar. Some cried, some collapsed. Others stood stiff and silent, staring at their hands as if trying to understand how they were still alive. One survivor later told a historian that he remembered feeling the destroyer's deck under his feet and thinking it felt unreal, like the world shouldn't be solid anymore after watching something so big vanish. Another said what haunted him wasn't the sinking itself, but the look on Captain Abe's face before he disappeared below. a kind of heavy acceptance. A man going down with a ship he barely had time to know. It's strange how small details like that become the memories people carry for a lifetime. The loss of Shinano wasn't just a naval disaster, it was a symbolic wound for Japan. She had been their last great hope of a massive carrier to support operations late in the war. A ship meant to bolster the failing fleet, a ship built from the bones of the Yamato itself, and she didn't survive her maiden voyage. Japan tried to keep her sinking quiet, burying it under layers of secrecy, but war doesn't stay quiet for long. Rumors floated. Whispers spread through naval circles. And by the time the war ended, the full truth came out. The largest warship ever sunk by a submarine wasn't some aging battleship or weakened cruiser. It was a brand new supercarrier undone by rushed construction, bad timing, and one determined American submarine. Years later, historians would dig through reports, cross-check diaries, and interview survivors from both sides. They pieced together the story bit by bit, like reconstructing a shipwreck using nothing but photographs and memories. Some researchers were amazed that a submarine as modest as the Archer-Fish could sink such a giant. Others said it made perfect sense. Size doesn't matter when you punch the right holes in the right places, and submarines have always been experts at finding weak spots. What I find remarkable, even now, is how much of the story hinges on the little things. The way a watertight door didn't quite seal, the way a pump wasn't fully fitted, the small decisions made by tired, overworked shipyard teams racing against time. It reminds you how fragile even the strongest machines are when people are stretched too thin. War pushes nations into frantic choices, and sometimes those choices come back like echoes. As for the men of the Archer-Fish, the medals eventually came. The recognition eventually came. But there must have been a moment when they first learned the truth, that each one of them sat back and let out a long, slow breath, a kind of disbelief mixed with pride and maybe even a touch of sorrow. After all, men who fight at sea know better than anyone that the enemy is human too. A submarine crew doesn't celebrate the drowning of sailors. They celebrate surviving, succeeding, making it home. But the weight of the loss, well, that's something every veteran carries somewhere deep. If you've been on this long story with me, thank you. These stories aren't short and they aren't simple. They take time, patience, and a love for understanding what came before us. If you haven't already, subscribing keeps you close by for the next journey, and hitting the like button helps this story reach more people who appreciate the past the way you do. All right, my friend, let's finish this voyage together. There's a strange kind of poetry to how the biggest ship sunk by a submarine went down on her first trip to sea. She was meant to be a show of strength, yet the rush to launch her ended up being her weakness. She was meant to carry aircraft, yet she had none aboard. She was built from the bones of the Yamato, yet she never fired a single shot. Some people say it proves size isn't everything. Others say it proves timing is everything. I think it proves something deeper. The ocean, like war, is unforgiving when pride outpaces preparation. Over time, stories like these fade at the edges. They get tucked away in thick, books, overshadowed by louder battles, bigger headlines, more dramatic victories and defeats. But every once in a while, when you dig deep enough, you find something that feels alive again. A ship that shouldn't have sailed. A submarine that shouldn't have found her. A twist of fate that changed the lives of thousands in just a few hours. And even though the Shinano and the Archer-Fish have their own chapter in history, I can't help thinking about the other side of the war. The brave crews who flew through the night, the ones who skimmed the treetops in heavy bombers, the ones who pushed their machines to the limit for missions that seemed impossible. The dambusters come to mind, the men of number 617 Squadron who flew impossibly low, threading heavy Lancaster bombers through narrow valleys in the dark to strike at targets T. Hat everyone else said couldn't be hit. They faced odds just as unforgiving as the sailors who tried to save the Shinano, and their courage came from the same quiet place inside the human spirit where duty and fear meet. Those dambuster crews trained until their hands shook. They memorized terrain by moonlight. They trusted each other the way the men aboard submarines trust each other in the dark. And when the time came, they flew into danger with engines roaring and hearts pounding, knowing full well that not everyone would make it home. Their mission was different in every practical sense, but the core of it, the bravery, the endurance, the willingness to push past fear, feels like it belongs to the same spirit that runs through all these wartime stories. When I think about the Shinano sinking, I think of the chaos and the cold water and the way men fought against impossible odds. But I also think about those dambuster pilots who whispered quiet prayers before takeoff, who smiled to steady their crewmates, who crossed enemy territory in the dark carrying hope strapped to their wings. And somehow these two stories, one in the sky, one in the sea, feel connected by a thread you can't see but you can feel. A reminder that courage doesn't care whether you're walking on a steel deck or sitting in the cockpit of a bomber. It rises in the same way. It lights up people from the inside. It gives history its sharpest edges and its most human moments. The ocean swallowed the Shinano, and the war eventually swallowed the whole world for a time. But the bravery shown by the men who went down with her, and the bravery shown by those who flew impossible missions over dark water, still reaches us today. It comes through in old letters, in fading photographs, in the tremble of a veteran's voice when he remembers a friend he never saw again. And it comes through in stories like this, stories we carry forward so the past doesn't disappear into the waves. In the end, whether you're talking about the sailors fighting to keep a wounded carrier afloat, or the dambusters steering low over a moonlit reservoir, what remains is the same. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things because the moment demanded it. The ships rust, the planes fall silent, the war ends, but the human spirit that carried them through the darkness doesn't sink, doesn't crash, doesn't fade. It lingers, steady as a heartbeat, waiting for someone to remember. And tonight, that someone was you.